No, but what, it's an interesting side question, but you listen to the Savage Nation on a regular basis. Why?
I'm sorry?
You listen to my show on a regular basis. Why?
I do, well, because I think that you're well informed and you're one of the only people out there that's honest about what's going on in the world.
All right, so, but you listen for the politics or for the variety of subjects? I'm just curious. I'm doing a sampling of my audience today.
Ooh, probably both. I would say more the politics.
Okay, so do you find my divergence today to these topics a waste of time?
No.
Oh, thank God you said no. I was hanging in there. I was sweating. Because if a former door girl in a swing club found this topic boring, I'm finished. I'm out of business. All right, thanks for the call. All right, I'll move on. You want hard politics? I'll give you politics. That's all. Light flash blinded pilot. Mysterious flash reported seconds before SF plane crash. You know and I know the government's going to deny it. You and I both know there are lunatics out there with laser beams that could have done this to the poor pilot, right? So what are you going to say about that? There's nothing you could say about it. It's a fact of reality. What else is going on? Let's see what else is in the news. It's not a lot of news. Saudi princess arrested in trafficking case. What'd you expect from Saudis? There's not really much. You can make the news up if you want. I want me to give you news. I'll give you news. Let's see what's on my website. Then I'll see if it's real news. I put some good stories up today. Let's see if I can excite your interest with these stories. Department of Justice organized Trayvon protests. Already covered it. Oh, here's a hot one. U.S. sends 4 more F-16's to Egypt despite Cairo tumult. Can you believe this? Why is Obama sending F-16's and tanks to Egypt at this time? Answer, because either he's a moron, he's corrupt, or he's an Islamist. Choose from A, B, C, or all of the above. Who was the new head of Egypt? Do any of you know the answer to that? Mohammed ElBaradei. You say, who cares about it? You know what? I think I'll give you a little primer on who the new head of Egypt is, because I actually covered it in Trickle Down Tyranny, now available in paperback. Yes, you can go buy the book and do yourself a favor. Do you know that ElBaradei was handpicked to run Egypt after the Muslim Brotherhood was thrown out, right? And you say, oh, that's a good thing. Wow, that's great. They got rid of all those. See, I haven't covered this yet, but you're going to get a shocker now. Gee, that's great. They got rid of those real extremists and the Muslim Brotherhood. I feel much better because the new head of Egypt is a moderate. Is he? You remember the name Mohammed ElBaradei? Well, go to pages 157 to 159 in Trickle Down Tyranny and reread what I wrote for you about that. Because it turns out that ElBaradei is a puppet of George Soros. Now, what does that have to do with what's going to happen next? Would you like me to give you a little hint? I'll give you a little hint. Here's my little hint. Many of you assume that the Muslim Brotherhood, as run by Mr. Morsi, was an extremist organization. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is an extremist organization. By any account, any fair-minded person would know that they're very extreme and very anti-Western, anti-Semitic, etc., very anti-woman, anti-homosexual. But we don't know who Morsi was, do we? I believe Morsi, it turns out, was extremely friendly toward the United States of America, despite what he was saying to placate the radicals within the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that Morsi was playing ball with the Obama administration. And I believe that the reason Obama has said we're not going to recognize the new group in Egypt is because a couple of reasons. If he calls it a coup, by law, he has to stop sending the F-16's and the tanks. That's number one. So given that he's a lawyer who always parses the truth, he will not call a coup a coup. So he says, no, it wasn't a coup. Well, it was a coup. So then who is ElBaradei? He's actually more radical than Morsi. See, this is something people don't know yet. It's very hard to understand what goes on in the Middle East, never mind in the Arab world, especially now. Most of us are not experts on it. I don't consider myself an expert, but I consider myself a fairly good analyst. And my analysis tells me that Morsi was the devil we know, and ElBaradei is the devil we don't know. And I also think that the reason the U.S. under Obama is freaked out over the ElBaradei appointment, meaning the rise of the so-called overthrow of Morsi, is because you're going to see more extremism now than you did before under Morsi. That is similar to the fact that Yasser Arafat, although, going back now in time, although he was extremely murderous and very dangerous, I believe at a certain point he was working with the United States government. I have no reason to know that for a fact. I'm simply speaking from the point of view of an analyst. Let's say I work for an intelligence agency and I was sitting in a room with you guys. I would say it's a likely possibility that although he was extreme, he kept some of the more extreme elements under control. Okay? He was a charismatic leader. And I'll tell you the same thing. It was the same with Gaddafi. Again, although he was an extremist, he was not as extreme as it could have been, as you're about to see in Libya. And so forth and so on. And so I think, therefore, you're going to be quite horribly shocked to find out that although you're now celebrating the overthrow, so-called, of Morsi and the so-called Muslim Brotherhood, you're going to soon wake up to find out that it has now morphed into something much more deadly and virulent under the new head of Egypt named ElBaradei. And I don't want to spell out the details for you, but you can find it in Trickle Down Tyranny on pages 157 and through 159. Let me read you just a few pieces here. Remember, he's the man who was the nuclear inspector, ElBaradei. You may want to know who that was. He was the nuclear inspector for Iran, right? That's who you remember him. ElBaradei is the guy who led the inspection of Iran's nuclear program when he was the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. You may remember some of that, right? And yet he called for everyone to take a timeout regarding the Iranian nuclear issue. In other words, he was an apologist for Iran's development of nuclear weapons. And he tried to go slow on looking into Iran. Okay? But what else do we know about him? Let me read you what I wrote. ElBaradei's pro-Islamist, anti-Israel agenda has made him a perfect mouthpiece for George Soros and the spread of the Soros Doctrine in the Middle East. In fact, he's on the board of Soros's International Crisis Group, and he was handpicked by Soros to be his representative in Egypt. On January 18, 2011, before the uprising in Egypt had begun, ElBaradei, in what was a veiled call to action for Islamists, warned that, quote, a Tunisia-style explosion could occur in Egypt. Obama wasn't standing idly by while all this was happening. Would you like to hear a little bit more? Because there's a lot more. After Mubarak was thrown out of office, ElBaradei emerged as a key figure in a shadow parliament that formed in Egypt. Shall I read on? The list of people on the board of directors of the ICG, along with ElBaradei, reads like a who's who of international anti-American, anti-Israel zealots. It includes Javier Solana, one of the most powerful figures in the European Union. Footnote, he also was the man who destroyed Serbia. Because of his Marxist sympathies and his support for the regime of Cuba's Fidel Castro, Solana was at one time on the United States subversives list. He was a good friend of Bill Clinton, by the way. Former Clinton administration National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, who once smuggled incriminating documents out of the National Archives by hiding them in his clothing, is another board member. You hearing this? As is General Wesley Clark, once fired from his NATO command position. Do you think that the people's uprising in the Middle East were being staged by Arabs seeking truly democratic governments? Do you think that the people of Tunisia and Egypt share the same belief in the effectiveness of nonviolent protest that the wide-eyed innocents in the Obama administrations hold? Let me set you straight. And I'll pause right there. It's all in my book, Trickle Down Tyranny, a book way ahead of its time, a prophet in his own time, and so forth and so on. Read the quote. This is one of the most prophetic books written in our time. And I highly recommend that you reread it if you own it, or go to a bookstore and just look at pages 156 through 157, and you'll find out why Michael Savage was right then, is right now, and is right here. And I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
You know, so I mixed it up tonight. I went from swinger couples and wife swapping to prostate cancer. I have the original study on the prostate cancer, and I found out what's wrong with the report. It's all BS, as you'd expect from the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, which is a government organ. I will tell you why that study is flawed. That's number one. I can't do it now.